Hi, welcome back to my art channel, or welcome here if this is your first time. Mermay is over and I finished my mermaid painting for it just in time. For this small acrylic painting I was trying out a new set of brushes by Artify as well as miniature brushes to add details on this very small format. So this is both a painting process and a review for those brushes. The sketches got done much earlier during the month. I was feeling motivated because I'd made these small arched panels with a handsaw and the power of so much sandpaper you wouldn't believe. And after painting on canvas and paper a lot over the last 2 months, I was eager to get back to gesso panels. The unique format made me want to paint something ethereal and otherworldly. And if you've seen some of my other sketches and paintings lately, you know that I love space photography as inspiration. So I imagined my mermaid as part of a galaxy art background, cradling a bright star or reaching for one. In these sketches I explored different poses. Mermaid poses aren't restrained by up and down, with her diving any which way, and this being set in outer space added to that sense of a weightless figure. Another point for mermaid paintings, you really need to plan to have room for that fishtail. I struggled with that as I wanted the main focus to be on her face and upper body, but without the fishtail this wouldn't be a mermaid after all. While I picked this pose for this first painting, I'll paint another version on the smaller gesso panel, so that made the decision paralysis easier to overcome. I had to focus on work and the sketches and panels were forgotten for a while. Once the brush set I'd ordered arrived and the end of May approached, I had to change that. While I have a lot of brushes, my smaller ones are slowly becoming harder to use for details, with the hairs flaring and the application becoming messier. And some of the larger ones too are showing signs of wear and I wanted to preserve them better. So I was looking for a cheap brush set that I could use when blocking in colors where I wouldn't be too sad if they got damaged and that had a lot of variety in sizes and shapes to make my collection more versatile. The Artify brushes come in this textile case which honestly is amazing, though I don't store these brushes in there now. It turned out to be the perfect protective case for traveling, and I use it for travel brushes and a variety of colored pencils in different sizes. The brushes come in a variety of shapes, which is the reason I'd picked this set in the first place. The set has multiple flats, angled flats, which I absolutely love, a nice variety of filbert brushes, pointed rounds, 2 liner brushes, 2 fan brushes, and 2 very large flats. I found a few stray brush hairs in the beginning, but after cutting those close to the handle, didn't have any issues with angled hairs or shedding over the last few weeks. As I'm filming this review and editing the unboxing, I did already use these for about 3 weeks for a variety of paintings, so I can give a more in-depth review and know that these won't just fall apart after a couple of uses, which I'm usually a bit worried about when it comes to very cheap brushes. The pointed rounds have some sizes that I found a tad repetitive, too similar to each other. I tend to reach for anything above size 10 in this set interchangeably, and since they all hold a precise point quite well, I'd have liked some more brushes between the size 4 and size 10 instead. I really like that smallest of the pointed rounds and have been taking it with me for travel sketching in gouache as well. They are meant for oils, acrylics, gouache and watercolors according to the description, and by the time of editing this I've used them for everything but oil paints as I'm not an oil painter. These are very soft synthetic brushes but have enough tension for heavy body acrylic paints, and the round and flat brushes especially worked amazing for some gouache sketches. The 2 liner brushes are quite unique, with more than enough tension to not feel flimsy despite their length, and I've been reaching for them when painting details on canvas quite a lot. The angled flats are amazing, giving both precision and quick area filling applications, and I've been using all the sizes they come in. For watercolors, I'm not a fan, as only the round brushes kinda work for them. and I found them not absorbent enough for wet-on-wet techniques. So if watercolors are your main medium, I wouldn't recommend this particular brush set for that specifically. I can't speak for oils as I'm not an oil painter, but can recommend them for acrylics and gouache so far. The filberts are pretty standard. I prefer the long filberts by Rosemary brushes because paint doesn't get stuck as easily, especially when filbert brushes are what I use to kinda aggressively push paint around. Though the longer I've been using these, the more I enjoy them, as they are that perfect mix of soft yet still resilient. I used the two largest flat brushes for varnishing and isolation coats multiple times, and you'll see how that goes at the end of this video. At the same time, I also got a set of miniature brushes. I embellish a lot of my prints by hand, and the coarse metallic paints especially have, by now, obliterated my miniature brushes I bought 3 years ago. This set also came with the tiniest flat brush I've ever seen and a handy angled brush similar in size to the smallest in the set by Artify. The synthetic brush hairs here are softer than the Artify sets, but not absorbent, so these are definitely not for watercolors either. They've been working great for tiny print embellishments in acrylics, and I'll use them for this miniature mermaid painting as well. As the end of the month approached, I sat down late at night, and since I already had the sketches, references and even a previous post-study to base my drawing on, sketched that pretty quickly. I wanted everything to be ready for daylight the next day, as I'd have time to paint that afternoon. Lately I've been using colored pencils a lot and reached for a deep red shade to sketch in the shadows here. Having light and shadow already clear in my sketch instead of just the line drawing showing the pose makes painting so much easier, and I can better focus on color mixing. On my way home from the city the next day, I grabbed these acrylic paint tubes by Korean brand Alpha, as well as a single Shinhan color for fun. The Alpha paints are incredibly cheap at 2,800 won, less than $2 US, and while they are less pigmented than more expensive brands, the actual colors are still beautiful and the pigment distribution even. I'll let you know why I like to combine cheap and expensive paints in just a moment. For once, I didn't use any fixative or clear gesso to keep the drawing in place, but just went in with a watery acrylic mix. For this soft stage of the painting, you can see that I'm using the sharp angled flat brushes by Artify. That sounds contradictory, but I found that if I go with a filbert or round brush, combined with the more diluted paint, the result really is too soft and vague. And while it can create beautiful textures to then build upon, that approach works better when I have many layers and a long time to paint ahead of me. At this stage, I love using those cheaper paints for experimental little paintings like this one. They are less pigmented, of course, but the more liquid texture makes them perfect for this glazing application, and I can fill in everything with a thin layer of color quickly. They are a great opportunity for trying out color combinations, and since these kinds of paints don't pack too much of a punch, are easy to paint over later. Though I have to say that the Venetian red surprised me as it got very intense. Alpha doesn't put the pigment number on their paints, but Venetian red or red iron oxide usually are PR101, and I love the beautiful shade this creates. This painting uses a very limited palette of the Venetian red I just mentioned, raw sienna, titanium white, ivory and Mars black, and a hint of Naples yellow. And then one shade that I, from the very beginning, used the more expensive version of, cobalt turquoise. It's a favorite color of mine, beautiful on its own but also gorgeous to work with when painting with red and brown hues. The water activates the colored pencil just enough to bring those shades to life again, and the red colored pencil shone through like an underpainting would. Once I had the overall colors laid in, I quickly moved to details for one key area, the face. I switched to the miniature brushes to test those as well. They worked amazing for those more liquid glazing color consistencies in the beginning, but I was then surprised how well they handled denser paint too, despite being so soft. The little flat that I'd mentioned in the beginning came in very handy for carving out the angles of her face. It's a brush I didn't know I needed or wanted, but turned out perfect for small formats like this. If I had the option, I'd buy like a dozen of just these, as well as the small pointed round by Artify, since I imagine these two will be the ones I use most. I then switched to the pointed round brushes to add detailing and slowly blend the paint. The soft brushes create a delicate look, and I loved how the colored pencil red underneath intensified the look of some of the more transparent shadow areas, as if the mermaid was glowing from within or hit by otherworldly light. Quite enamored with these miniature brushes, I continued using them a bit more on the background as well, as they really were perfect for this tiny format. I came back to the more sturdy Artify filbert brushes for some heavier dark paint layers to fill in the background later. As you can see, some of the areas remained transparent until the end, as I didn't want to over-render the painting. Over-rendering doesn't just apply to level of details, but to hard and soft edges as well. Even with all the stars and fish scales, I kept the color transparency high and the brushes soft to keep an airy, light feel to it all. Using the angled flats gives me precision. I can fill in large areas quickly, but seamlessly switch to smaller areas and carve out a figure without everything becoming muddy. You'll see that as I go from here, my brushes become less sharp, filberts and rounds instead of flats and angled flats, but my paint becomes thicker, so that way I balance soft and hard edges at all painting stages. The only spots that have truly opaque paint are some of the main stars, like the one she cradles in her hands, and the parts of the mermaid closest to that light source. As the light fall-off progresses, details and sharp edges fade and flow together. The final stars still use the titanium white by Alpha, so they aren't as opaque as they'd be if I painted them with the golden heavy-body titanium white. keeping the galaxy background more subtle rather than overpowering, with her fishtail fading into the Orion Nebula pattern. A few days later I applied a single layer of matte varnish by Liquitex. I used the large flat brushes from Artify, but also a very soft bristle brush to smooth out the varnish layer with the lightest of touches at the end. I think the Artify ones work well on their own too, but since they are slightly stiffer might leave some marks behind if you're not careful. Overall, I'm really happy with all my new brushes, would love to buy some of them as singles instead of as part of a set, and I'm happy I got to finish this mermaid for Mermay just in time. I'll be posting a separate review for the Artify brushes used with gouache paints soon, and hope you'll enjoy the movie scenes I picked to paint with them for that. Let me know if you ever participated in Mermay and if you have any brush recommendations for me for the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next art video.